live now.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to FICCI's conference on water, sanitation, and waste management, urban perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all are aware, urban parts are home to more than half of the world's population. Around 6.4 billion people will live in cities by 2050. These people will be living in a world with limited natural resources. Rapid population increase, industrialization, climate change is just a few of the enormous difficulties that urban infrastructure and systems are confronting. And as cities grow, so do urban challenges. The relationship between infrastructure and its impact on the environment has been propounded and debated in various feedback loops. While it is a part of the problem, the more importantly, it is very much the solution to address these problems for sustainable development. Let's hear the viewpoint from our experts today in terms of investing in cleanliness, water, and sanitation, as well as creating a long term environment for a better world. I would like to welcome our distinguished panel present amongst us for this conference. Mr. Prakash Shadrinathan, Executive Director and CEO, Kathari Water Management Private Limited. Ms. Nayantara Nag, Partner Projects, Dry Legal. Mr. Bodhisattva Dasgupta, CTO and Head of Proposals, JWIL Infra Limited. Mr. Mayor Garg, Head Infrastructure Services, Rudra Abhishek Enterprises Limited. The session will be moderated by Mr. Sudeep Sinha, Partner Infrastructure, Deloitte, who himself is an infrastructure expert and will bring his own knowledge and understanding to the table during discussions. Over to you, Mr. Sinha.
Thanks a lot, Shelley. I think it is indeed a privilege for me personally to be moderating this session, which has such esteemed panelists. And I'm sure we will all be greatly benefited by the insights that we get from each of our panelists today. So without further ado, let me start this session. First, I'll move to you, Mr. Prakash Nathan. Since you've been a doyen in this industry and have been working as a developer and as an investor in the water and the wastewater space, I would begin by asking you to set a context as to how you have seen this sector evolving over a period of time, specifically in context of PPP projects, and keeping a lens of an investor and a developer at the back of your mind. Mr. Nathan.
Yeah, Sudeep, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. See, I have been involved in the PPP space since the mid 1990s. And my primary area of focus has been water and wastewater as well as renewables. In terms of it'll be always useful to know why PPPs in general started, and then I will also kind of touch upon some stories around the water sector. So PPPs are fundamentally started in India simply because governments of the day did not have enough money, and building infrastructure was fundamental to economic growth. And then it was kind of necessitated, I would say, that people said, okay, let us throw the problem to the private sector, let them bring in the capital, and let them build and operate infrastructure. So obviously the initial beginnings happened in the transportation sector, in the road sector to be specific. Thereafter, it moved to other spaces. I mean, I'm not touching upon telecom, etc., or electricity. But if you look at more on the ground, visible kind of stuff, it happened in transport. And then we had some private airports coming in. And these structures also kind of got evolved. So if you look at how PPPs came about in the initial set of projects that I was involved with in the water sector, they were fundamentally structured as joint ventures with government. So government picks an institution as a partner, and a joint venture is formed. And then the joint venture defines the rules of how the project will actually get executed and financed. So as you know, in any kind of public-private partnership, as opposed to a government project, you end up having multiple parties. I mean, once you have a PPP, you have a lender, you have an investor, you have contractors in a government project as well as in a private project. You also have to kind of look at how the customer gets benefited very, very closely, because ultimately the customer is going to pay for any service that you put in. So customer becomes very important in a PPP project. So the advantage of doing it as a joint venture at that time was, okay, many people did not want to copy what is happening in other parts of the world as a straight bid concession. They said, okay, let us do a joint venture. So there is full transparency of what the customer is benefiting and what we are charging the customer. So there is alignment in terms of the government saying that, okay, we are not favoring party A or party B, or if you award the concession to somebody and that person does not deliver, then the government was a bit wary in terms of taking that responsibility. They were also wary in terms of trying to understand the economics of a PPP project. So it shouldn't happen tomorrow that a controversy breaks up, that you are overcharging the customer without really understanding the economics. Somebody is making a lot of profit. So in a sense, a joint venture became a transparency vehicle where government was on the board, the private investor was on the board, and the price discovery mechanism essentially related to the capex and opex was done through a competitive bidding. So as far as the EPC and O&M contractors, they were only asked to do what they actually best know how to do. They were not asked to become investors. So the investor and the government was, if I have to put it, they were on one side of the table, managing the customer, managing the environment, getting the money for the project. And the EPC and O&M contractors have only that particular job to do, which is the specification and performance management, which they have to undertake. So that was a very clear separation, and therefore the risks were able to be managed better. From that time to now, of course, a lot of things have changed. The government has obviously understood how to do a PPP project better. Institutional mechanisms have come in, regulations have come in various sectors, including the transportation. Financing as the only reason why government wanted to do PPP has also kind of gone away. Now, many governments are much richer than what they were earlier. So government is also then kind of discerning, okay, should I do for this project, can I put my own money or borrow using my balance sheet rather than give it to the private sector? And if you look at the water sector again, very specifically, the second evolution happened with the private industries wanting to outsource water. So there was a project that we were involved, which was Indian Oil wanting to completely outsource their water requirements to a private sector. And obviously, collection risk was not at all an issue. Indian Oil was guaranteeing a take or pay for the water that is produced. Everything else was to be done by the private sector. So there again, there was a lot of enthusiasm. But on the municipal side, I think many experiments have not really taken off until the Navami Gangai AM model kind of came into existence. So from a joint venture to a completely BOT project, which was in the industrial domain, now we are in the era of HAM, where government is saying, I am putting in X percentage of the capex as a grant money, and the balance you guys have to recover over a 15 or a 20-year operating period. The current belief is that that is the best model in which you can bring in the private sector. So this is really the kind of long and short in terms of, if I have to kind of summarize in 5 minutes, long and short of evolution. Everybody is learning because one fundamental lesson is that every project is different. I mean, you can always have standard structures, but every project at the end of the day tends to have its own risk and rewards. So learning process continues, and I'm sure that we will end up more richer at the end of this discussion with respect to some new suggestions coming up as to how we need to go forward. So that is right now from me, Sudeep.
Thank you, Mr. Nathan. I think that was a very important kind of a background, and you put the background very well. So I just picking on the question. I mean, you raised the model of hybrid annuity. So I will move to Nayanthara, whom I know was involved in actually conceptualizing, perhaps the initial Namami Gange contracts, and also has been involved in a lot of innovative project structures which involve both urban and the industry and the interface. So Nayanthara, I wanted to understand a little bit more about what, if you could just give a context of how this concept came through. What were the initial discussions? What were the initial challenges that you faced? What are the key issues that you kind of looked at?
Yeah, I'm in a meeting. Yeah, please call me later.
How did you kind of undertake those challenges? And also a little bit more about some more innovative project structures that you may have kind of looked at in the recent past. So if you could kind of take us through that entire journey and what have been your experiences, that would be great. Nayanthara, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Sudeep. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, you are.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Nathan, for setting the context so well for all of us. Well, as Sudeep mentioned, I was of course involved in the Namami Gange program, where we were the legal advisors to the National Mission for Clean Ganga in the first phase, which was for the 3 cities of Varanasi, Haridwar, and Mathura. And in our role as the legal consultant, we were working very closely with the transaction advisors and technical consultants to develop the first set of bid documents and concessions around the hybrid annuity model, which is probably now what we see as whether one calls it, but certainly a more viable model than what we've seen previously. And there are variations of that, Sudeep, to your question of, in terms of innovative modeling. But before we get to certain details around the hybrid annuity, I think, so just to dwell a little bit on what Sudeep mentioned in terms of what are the challenges that we encounter when we design PPP projects with government counterparties, right? As Mr. Nathan mentioned, private participation in industrial sector projects, whether it's effluent treatment, wastewater treatment for private customers, has been prevalent and has attracted a lot more interest even from investors, funds, both strategic and sort of even private equity investors. There is sort of comparatively been subdued interest in public sector projects. Now, and we've always seen this when we've advised the private sector, we act for various people like the Macquaries and the Veolias of the world. And we've sort of seen what are the issues and challenges that they face when they're looking at government tenders. I think the biggest challenge when we were advising the government, not just on Namami Gange, but even after that, we've sort of done a waste to energy project in Chennai, which unfortunately didn't go through for environmental reasons, but it was very advanced and it got approval of the municipal corporation and all of that. The biggest challenge is helping the government shift from an EPC mindset to a PPP mindset, right? For the government to realize that when you're doing PPP, it is a fundamentally different construct where your private sector participant is your partner. There is a reason why it's called public-private partnership. They are not your contractor. Therefore, when you look at an EPC contract and you look at how you allocate risks in that contract, and you try and superimpose that sort of a traditional design build risk allocation onto a PPP, you're setting it up to fail. Because when a private sector participant has skin in the game, when they are putting in equity or they are raising debt, you need to provide some form of downside protection. Now, this downside protection comes in various forms. You need to ensure that the contract is designed in a manner, firstly, that they can raise financing at a viable cost. Financing is available. Question is, what is the cost of that capital? And what can you really do through the contract to reduce the cost of that capital to enlarge your pool of bidders? Governments often, and I don't want to make a sort of sweeping generic statement, but in our experience, we've often found that the starting position for ULBs, urban local bodies, whether they're Jal Nigams or municipal corporations, is a place of mistrust. They believe that the private sector participant is coming to just extract its pound of flesh, to milk the system for what it's worth, and that they will always get a suboptimal solution in return. The trust is missing to start with. Therefore, they approach these contracts from the perspective of, let's put as much onus as possible on the private sector. Let's hold the private sector to extremely high KPIs, to unreasonable standards, and to very, very stringent penalties, which may not even pass the test of reasonableness. All of this makes these projects unattractive because on the one side, you're not providing any form of protection. You're not ensuring that there will be an assured revenue stream. You aren't providing any form of payment security that you want. There are, of course, the traditional delays that have plagued all infrastructure projects, whether it's on the EPC side, whether it's on the PPP side, there's a delay in handover of land, particularly contiguous land. Now, when you have projects where you have land for your main facility, you have land for your trunk infrastructure, your pipelines, some of it is available, some of it is not. You can't do the basic engineering at the same time. When your project gets staggered, your costs increase. There is no protection for cost overrun. So land and approvals has traditionally always been a problem. It has been a problem in EPC, it's been a problem in PPPs. The other problem, and then we'll get to what are some of the things that we looked at in terms of being able to overcome these or improve the bankability of these projects. The other problem is just the way bid processes are run. Projects are poorly conceived, ill-defined. You will very rarely have proper parameters that are drawn out. There is very little that's done in terms of optimization of land. Thereafter, when the bid is launched, the contracts don't go through a rigorous sort of review process. When bidders come with queries, the reaction of most bidding authorities is to say no change considered or no change contemplated. They don't want to consider changes that are being proposed. Very short timelines are provided to bidders often to respond to bids. Then, of course, you keep extending timelines and all of that, but the short timelines in the beginning often discourage certain bidders who feel that they need time for detailed site surveys and all of that. This is coupled with the risk that the bid document will say, I'm not giving you any protection for site conditions. It's, it's on an as-is, where-is basis. You take it and this is what it is and the risk is yours. There's very little in terms of pre-existing environmental risks that are addressed. Who bears these risks? Whose liability is it? And particularly international investors, players like Veolia, they have very, very stringent HSE requirements, which are global standards. So they are averse to investing in projects where there is unknown exposure, particularly to pre-existing environmental conditions. Thereafter, of course, the biggest issue is there's very little emphasis on technological innovation. And I think we will be speaking about technology later. It's always a cost plus, it's always a cost, sort of lowest cost model, right? So there is no quality assessment that's really done. And when purely cost is the only factor you're looking at, you will often get suboptimal solutions. We have seen this in our Namami Gange experience, where for one of the cities, all the cost was front-loaded in the capex. The O&M cost that was quoted for the STP was so low, was abysmally low. The technical consultant said that this is unviable. Nobody can do O&M at this cost. The National Mission for Clean Ganga knew nobody could do O&M at that cost, but they had set the bid parameters as such, where they were taking an aggregate of O&M charges and bid project cost, and whoever was the lowest would win. So thereafter, they couldn't change the bid parameters after the bid had been launched. So when you have this sort of an approach, you're essentially setting up projects to fail. Now, some of the things that we addressed, both in the first tender as well as what we learned from Varanasi and what we learned from Haridwar and what we tried to sort of address in Mathura. First thing first, in the bid process, first, of course, there was a very detailed and thorough risk assessment. And we were very clear that if an IFC was a transaction advisor, that if you're going to back this and bless this tender document, there has to be a more appropriate allocation of risk. It took a lot of capacity building with the Jal Nigams, with the municipal corporations to explain to them how PPP is different. The fact that there is capital that they are investing and therefore you don't need to penalize them in the manner in which you penalize a EPC contractor. They do have skin in the game. The annuity that they're going to get is sufficiently high to incentivize them to stay invested in the project. Basis that, there were certain conditions that were set on, let's say, environmental clearance, which is always a stumbling block. We had said this is something that the authority has to get. You will start applying right from the time sort of the initial project is conceptualized. You will work with the private participant, of course, because there were feed designs and detail engineering, all of that, which had to be provided. But the obligation was to start the process was on the authority. Most of the land, I think we had said 100% of the land is provided as a CP. The advantage there was you had the central government who was a party to the agreement. So there was an escrow which had your next, so that any point in time had to be funded with your next construction milestone. It had to be funded with at least the next, I think, 3 months of annuity payments, or the next 2 annuity payments, if I remember correctly. It had to be maintained at all times. That gave bidders a lot of comfort. The fact that there was NMCG in it and they weren't relying only on the Jal Nigam Municipal Corporation balance sheet, which was a major concern to start with. And therefore, they had to be sitting in the contract. Lender rights were recognized. There were clear, not just substitution rights that were set out in the agreement. There were direct agreements that were drafted, which would be signed with the lender. So lenders did have direct recourse. That certainly gives lenders more comfort in a new sector such as this, or well, at least where hybrid annuity was being tried for the first time. The biggest change was it is an availability-based model. So you're dealing from risk of what is the value of the byproduct that's being recovered? Is there a market for byproduct? What is going to happen with the treated water? So for Mathura, for instance, the treated water was being sold to IOCL. But these were all elements that the concessionaire was de-risked from. The concessionaire was getting availability-based payment, and that was the biggest security. For the fact that they can't be responsible for whether you're being able to collect the sewerage tax, whether you're being able to generate revenues. So they were completely de-risked from that. The other thing that we tried to do to solve the bid issue is, when we move forward, is to say that there will be a percentage that's specified, that your O&M cost, the ratio between your O&M cost and your bid project cost cannot be less than a certain amount, to ensure that you're not being able to front load the capital cost. The other thing that we provided for was a concept of an available bid capacity in terms of qualification, so that you're not just looking at net worth, because somebody could have net worth but could have committed that same net worth to 5 different projects, and then you don't have the ability to actually execute. But available bid capacity took into consideration not just your net worth, but what is the capital you have already committed to existing projects which have concurrent timelines with the Namami Gange program. And basis that, an assessment was made that do you actually have the capacity to deliver these projects. So these were some of the changes that we made to ensure more viable outcomes, and not that it's just a race to the bottom with the lowest bidder on an aggregate basis. I think I'll stop there for a bit. And
yeah, no, I think very interesting to get the historical perspective. And I think all of us, perhaps in this forum and many amongst the audience, have used parts of your work, and probably it's also evolved over a period of time. So very interesting. Thank you. So I will, shift a little bit from PPP, because we do know that EPC and item rate contracts still are the dominant mode of procurement in the water and wastewater space. So my question to Mr. Garg, who's been working in the sector for so long, as to what are the challenges that you have seen the water sector, specifically EPC projects, Mr. Garg?
Mr. Garg, you're on mute.
Yeah. Generally, there are two types of contracts. I would say three: EPC, item rate, and the lump sum contracts, which I've generally come across. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, you
Hello.
are. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you are.
Yeah, no, especially for the water supply sector that I have been involved with, both in for ADB funded projects and then in Amrit and Smart City, and followed by JJM now with third party inspection and quality monitoring. I find that EPC is not exactly being followed in letter and spirit. It is design, build, and operate. Because in EPC, when we talk about the water supply projects, the state governments tend to fix all the components, that is design all the components, that is starting from transmission, main distribution network, OHSR. You talk about the house service connections, everything is frozen in terms of design, detail drawings, and also quantities. So it's only the water treatment plant which is left out. Or if you say, talk about the sanitation sector, it is only the STP or the wastewater treatment plant which is left out for the contractor to really procure and design the system. And I would say that we found it very difficult to initially to convince the state government to flow with the time and incorporate the latest clauses, or to facilitate the contractor who is coming to execute and also design your system, which is costing as much as more than 200 crores. And initially, they were not prepared to include even advance clause in the contract. They were all thinking that, okay, once he draws the advance, he will run away. So that was one. And then there were issues like sitting over the designs, because as a consultant, we used to send the designs to the client for approval. Good for construction drawings also to be approved by the client before those could be issued to the contractor. So those were also some of the difficulties which we found. And they were always running against time. That is, even the designers were put under a lot of stress by the client. Okay, why don't you do it? Why don't you work 24 hours a day? So in that scenario, the designers tend to make more mistakes. Whereas I instructed my designers to take their time and let the pressure come on me, and I'll take the brickbats. So the designer should be at peace while designing a system, and maybe getting best of the quotations from the market or from the trade. And so we had our challenges, and in a given time, we were able to execute and plan 9 water supply scheme in Chhattisgarh very effectively. And the item rate, I would say, is not really, it's a very scientific way of tendering, where you take measurements, but basically you are governed more by the rates of the items. So it is generally used for term contract, maybe for defense cantonments or for railways, where you have varieties of items to be executed. And you don't worry about the detailed design or detailed drawings in the beginning. So, and the worst part is that you come to know about the profitability only after the completion of the project. And you have to devote more manpower and skilled manpower, both from the client and from the consultant side, who know how to take measurements and keep a record. So this is not really the end thing. Yeah, for smart cities where you have various kinds of works, like including stormwater drainage, you have the gardens and other green spaces development, and like this. So their item rate can be used. And this is all I have to say to start with. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. We've kind of spoken about water, wastewater, but the next speaker, next panelist, Mr. Dasgupta, is also doing, started doing some work in the irrigation space. And as we all know that that 85% of our water still goes into agriculture. So irrigation continues to be a very important sector if you see the water sector space. So Mr. Dasgupta, because you started working in the irrigation and in specifically in this particular space. So would you like to outline some unique challenges that you've seen in this sector vis-a-vis what you've seen in other sectors, and how do you see participation in all of the irrigation space?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I think, Sudipji, your last part, probably last few seconds got a bit rattled up. Probably it's my internet connection or yours, but never mind. I got your point anyway. So as you rightly pointed out, 80 to 85% of the water that is allocated from the water sources, the reservoirs or the rivers or the dams. So everything goes to agriculture, and initially or till even for the last since the last few years, it has always been channel irrigation. Okay, so the government was using channel irrigation, and it kind of made a there was a massive conflict. There has been a massive conflict because the people at the tail end were not receiving water, and there had always been these kind of fights that the water is not reaching their agricultural fields and all those. So all those kept aside, the government has now more and more got the private sector into the equation by trying to move irrigation from channel to piped. Right now, the challenges remain the same, more or less. I would say there are certain challenges which have evolved new, but otherwise the challenges remain the same. Like, for example, a dam construction, all these irrigation projects are based on a particular dam, and there are very few irrigation projects which are built on existing dams. Now, the dam construction can take from anywhere between 5 to 20 years. I mean, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but that's how it has been. I mean, we have been seeing in Rajasthan, in MP, there are dams which have been getting constructed for the last 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. Now, in one of our projects, we are having 17 intakes, out of which 9 intakes are getting water. The other 8 are not, because the dam is not ready. So I can have the entire system downstream ready, but if the real thing, which is the source of water, is not coming, then the whole point is lost, right? So this is one of the major challenges which we are facing, and it's not that it is something which can be solved so easily, because once one department is conceptualizing the water source, the other department is conceptualizing the water carriage. There is some other department which is conceptualize how much water is required. So there is 3 departments. Now, then there can be central government. The dam can be in middle of one state or middle of 2 states. So all put together, the water source becomes one of the most important challenges, which is plaguing this particular sector. The next part is what we call the dead run. So what is a dead run? A dead run is basically I'm picking up water from an intake. So let's hope that there is an intake where there is water and I'm picking it up water. So then I'm having a dead run. I'm having a dead run for 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers. So what is a dead run? Because the rest of the part, let's say in that 40 kilometers part, somebody has already done the irrigation. It can be the old channel irrigation. It can be some other project which has been done. It can be probably it is crossing an urban locality, anything. Now, what happens is this 40 kilometer, 50 kilometer. Now, these are really big pipes which we are talking about. For example, we are working on a project in MP, and this dead run of 41 kilometers or something like that. It's a 3-meter dia pipe. So you can understand a 3-meter diameter pipe which is making a dead run, how much the cost it is increasing, right? I mean, steel prices. Steel prices are almost like London weather. So the steel price index was 179 in April. Now it is 154. Tomorrow it might become again 165. So, and the cost component, which is like making probably 50%, One, it is fluctuating, and second, it's a dead run. So you can understand, let's say the project is like 1,000 crores, so my 500 crores is stuck on something which is actually not bringing value. So this is one more challenge, not from the construction perspective as per se, I'll come to that, but more from where the government or where the exchequer's money is sinking, I would say. I mean, everything is exchequer money, right? At the end of the day, it's exchequers. So one is the dead run. Then the second point is when I'm making these dead runs, so let's say through forest or through over railway lines or over river, there is a bridge. So then comes the permissions. So again, it's a file moving from one table to another table to another table to another table, and it's delaying projects. Again, what is the cost of delay? The cost of delay is, your index is changing, your steel price is fluctuating. All these are happening. So this is one of the main challenges what we face is right of way. So basically, where we are going through, how we are going through, is it forest? Is it not? Is it a rocky strata? Is it not? The unique part of this irrigation project is the DPR, which is prepared by the government, is just for your reference. When you take up these irrigation projects, you have to create a DPR on your own. And once you start creating the DPR, suddenly you realize that you have not considered hard rock. You have only considered soft rock, depending on the DPR which was given to you. And now that the DPR of the government has already said that, you see, this is only for information, you have to create your DPR. So again, your price variation starts. And once the price variation starts, either the contractor absorbs, it will seldom do. What it will do, it will try to make some extra claims. When you're talking about extra claims, the project is again moving into the delayed direction. So this is one more thing. The third most important point what we have seen is when we encounter irrigation fields in between. So let's say we're doing a dead run. We are doing a dead run through a field where you have standing crop. Now, if you have a standing crop, you have to provide crop compensation. So two ways to look at it. Either you do the thing between March and June, let's say in a cropping period, you do it between March and June, and you are okay. So, you can walk through it. But in that case, you have only that window in a year to do this particular project. So that's why an irrigation project sometimes can take up to 6 to 7 to 8 hours. Okay, years, right? Because you have only March to June. So 3 months of working period, rest of the times you have standing crop. Or then you provide crop compensation. You provide, money to these villagers, to these farmers, explain them, you have got water, you friends have not. So, please allow us to go through this line, and you try to reduce the crop compensation. Because either you have not considered crop compensation or your project is getting delayed, so you want to go through the standing crop, and this kind of thing starts to happen. And then finally, the most important is the land acquisition. In these cases, in most of the times, all these irrigation sectors or these rural drinking water projects like the JJM projects, which are there in the state of Karnataka, that land acquisition is in the scope of the private contractor. Land for constructing an intake, the land for constructing a DC. In irrigation, we don't have WTPs, but you have DCs, you have BPTs. You have break pressure tanks, you have distribution chambers. I'm like using technical words, might not be relevant. So that happens, right? Now, land acquisition by government and land acquisition by a private player, completely two different ball games. Completely different. I mean, the government will tell you, what is there in land acquisition? Pay 2 lakh rupees an acre or whatever, 1 lakh rupees an acre, and you're done. The moment you are there, the moment you walk into the village and say that, look, Mr. Sarpanch, I need this land for my BPT or for my DC or for my intake, whatever, the guy will say, oh yeah, happily, we should be, progress of the nation, etc., 10 lakhs an acre. And what you do now? You can't do anything because your clock is ticking. You have to, get the project up and running, all that. So you go to the Patwari, you go to every single person in this earth, then there is a, then there is a barter system which goes on, and finally, you settle at 5 lakhs. You had considered 1 lakh only. Your project cost has gone up again. So you do all this, then you set up an irrigation project. Congratulations, you have finished it on time, but you have all these factors which has already gone in. So these are, quite a few challenges which I have seen in my last, 20, 22 years working in this rural irrigation and similar kind of sector. So that's about it, I think.
No, I think excellent. My own personal view is that irrigation, the inefficiencies in the irrigation system are huge. And, that's the next big thing for private sector participation and performance-based contracts. And I'm very glad that, you've given our participants a feel of what I feel is, going to be a much bigger thing in the future. So thank you so much. So I will, because we've covered water, industrial water, irrigation, we haven't national policies and across the experiences in that space. So it would be great if you could address your experience and also in general solid waste, if you're able to provide a few. Is there a problem?
Yes, Mr. Sinha, I think there is a low bandwidth issue at your end.
Okay.
So
Is
maybe
it
you
better?
can switch off your camera and can you just repeat it again?
Sure. Is it better now?
Yeah, yes, I think so.
Okay, all right. So Nayantara, my question was more in terms of solid waste and waste to energy and your experiences with respect to those projects.
Right. Thanks, Sudeep. So I would say our experience has been a bit of a mixed bag. On the PPP side, we've not seen too many successful projects in India. So just sort of to give some context, we're also advising the government on a waste management project in Bangladesh. Now, similar challenges in terms of in fact, at least India, the regulatory framework is a lot more evolved. I don't think they even have the enabling policy framework that we do. We're also, and which is the stark contrast, we are advising a bidder for a waste to energy project in Abu Dhabi, where the counterparty is the Emirates, the electrical, the water and electrical company or electrical supplier. That's for the EWEC, essentially. That's what it's called. When we sort of look at their tenders, right, and how they are running their processes, is when you realize what is the homework that we need to do in India that we aren't doing. In terms of the information they can provide, in terms of the data they have of the calorific value, the quality of waste that you can expect, the credit worthiness of the counterparty, the fact that the investor is being de-risked from the quality and quantity of waste, the fact that they are providing, there is a stake of the government in the SPV. So they actually, as a part of the tender document, provide a shareholders agreement, provide a template, EPC, O&M, everything is a part of the bid pack. So you know when you're going into the project, you're going in with your eyes wide open. It significantly reduces cost of capital. Now here, the reason we can comment on this is because they also need you to have a financing term sheet in place at the time you're submitting a bid. So therefore, you're also only attracting quality bidders. And we have seen how the same, so an NTPC, the financing, and this is we're talking about someone like NTPC, the financing they can get in India as compared to what an international bank would be willing to lend at the rate they're willing to lend for a project such as that. There's a stark difference. And a lot of this goes into how they conceptualize their projects and how they enforce their contracts. Now in India, and this is the experience we've had, this is again for the government, a waste to energy project that we were doing. And as I said, it's sort of, we went through the motions and the bid documents were in place. Initial sort of stakeholder consultations also happened, and it eventually failed because of Well, partially lack of bidder interest and also because of the environmental challenges. Now, one of the biggest challenges are the leakages in the entire value chain itself, because the bidder who's coming in is only operating, this is specifically in the context of waste to energy, is operating the plant. They have no control over how the segregation of waste is happening. How do you ensure that the calorific value of waste is such that you'll actually be able to generate electricity at the PLF that you have assumed? Now, typically, you'd see a lot of these projects have the revenue stream is usually a tipping fee, which is sort of per ton of waste that you handle, and a combination of the tariff that you get for the electricity. But the fact is, both of these are variable. And why would an investor who's investing their capital take this risk? Because neither is in their control, or rather, one is dependent on the other. They aren't doing the collection, segregation, transportation of waste. So they can't control what is the waste that's coming, what is the calorific value. They therefore can't control what is the electricity that's being generated. That was a big challenge, and a lot of projects have failed because the calorific value of waste was such that it couldn't generate the kind of electricity that it had. When we were doing these investor consultations and we were participating in those, one thing that we heard from a lot of players is we are not power producers. We are waste sector players. So do not treat us as power producers. For us, the fact that there is a tariff for this electricity is not what the revenue stream is, not going to make it an attractive revenue stream. What they tried to do there is couple a landfill sort of a project along with the waste to energy. So the inert waste from the waste to energy plant goes into the landfill. It was a PBEL, the whole piggyback engineering landfill. A lot of players who were interested in waste to energy were not interested in the landfill at all. Like people like Veolia, for instance, will never do a public land, or they're not interested in doing any government landfill project. They may do a private landfill project. So one of the first things we did there was to split out the two. And the kind of hybrid annuity model that was looked at for two were very different. So for instance, for the landfill, almost 80% of the capex was coming from the government because it's almost like an EPC, a services contract. The government was providing the waste for the daily cover, compaction, all of that. Whereas for the waste to energy, it was closer to what we see in the water sector, which was more a 40-60 sort of a ratio. We also said, again, there has to be an availability-based payment. Dealing it, there's no tipping fee. There's an if your plant is available, you will get a certain payment, which is your O&M, fixed O&M costs. And there is, of course, your annuity payment. If we can't deliver the waste, or the waste is not of a calorific value that you can meet the PLF, that's not your problem. The tariff was going to the government because they were getting a fixed annuity and they were getting an O&M charge. The tariff was going to the government. We also tried to fix what was obviously an issue in terms of overlapping KPIs. So you would have a KPI saying that minimum availability of X number of compactors at the landfill. You would also have a KPI linked to a minimum density of compaction that you achieve. But the fact is, if you're collecting LD for both, it's unattractive because you will, if you don't have your compactors available, you will obviously not be achieving that compaction on a particular day or week. So if you're collecting LDs for both, it's a double dip. So these are the sort of issues that we try to solve for in the project to make it a more balanced contract, to ensure a guaranteed revenue stream by delinking it from any tipping fee and all of that. It still failed. It failed because of environmental challenges. It failed because the site, Chennai, is so congested. The site was close to ecologically sensitive zones, close to highways which are prohibited. And most important, if the solid waste management rules had to be enforced, the standards had to be enforced, it was making the project unviable. There were NGT orders that said that waste to energy, which is through mass incineration, should be the least preferred mode. If RDF is not possible, if other sort of ways of handling waste is not possible, then you should look at waste to energy. So there was a mandate then at the end given to the Chennai Corporation saying, please think of another way of handling this because this mass incineration is not environmentally sound. And that's why eventually the project failed. But I think going back to my point where I started, that the way we conceptualize and design projects requires a lot of thought when you compare with how it's done in other countries and why projects succeed there and they sometimes fail here. Yeah.
Extensive overview of what works and what doesn't work. Then I will kind of just shift the conversation back to Mr. Nathan. So, Mr. Nathan, generally, PPP structures and PPP projects in the water and wastewater space have been, a little behind the curve as compared to, say, other sectors like transport. So how do, why haven't we seen more PPP projects or more private sector participation in from a risk sharing perspective in this particular sector? And how do we kind of change that going ahead in the future?
Yeah, Sudeep, this has been a pet peeve for many investors as to why it is not happening in this sector. And if there is, if I have to put in one fundamental reason, is that no investor actually sees money in water. I mean, you just do a comparison with electricity. There is a certain way in which electricity is consumed and charged, more importantly. So there is a certain defined revenue collection that is coming in. And okay, there are still inefficiencies in the system, so things can only get better. But if you look at it from the water sector perspective, the fundamental reason that I believe why it is not even what you call raising an eyebrow with investors is simply because they don't see the money. So you need, as World Bank used to say once upon a time, and probably continues to say in the Indian context, that it is the willingness to charge. Does the governments or whoever is the regulator, do they have a mechanism by which the right tariff is charged to the customer? That is only when money will come in. Otherwise, what is happening, whether it is with the HAM model, I mean, Nayanthara spoke about all the structuring issues that she went through in designing the HAM model. Ultimately, it is riding on the back of guarantees coming from the World Bank, right? Why do you need those guarantees? And that is simply because nobody believes that the municipal system can pay. What is the mechanism by which they will pay? So this, I think, is one fundamental issue. And the second thing is, again, going back to what she was attributing both in the solid waste space as well as in the water, wastewater space is the government should actually see this as a partnership. And therefore, there are certain things the government has to do, and there are only certain things the private sector can do. So whether it is right of way, whether it is giving them, if you're talking about a renovation and modernization project, the existing status of the assets must be made available to the bidders upfront and not for them to go there and discover, like Bodhisattva was saying about irrigation projects. Ultimately, PPP is about a partnership where both parties understand what is the risk and therefore what is the reward. Okay. And if that can be made amply clear at the beginning, then clearly it will attract more people. So you need visibility of cash. And if cash is not there, then the projects will ultimately end up being an EPC rather than a PPP. You need transparency in terms of what the private sector is expected to do and what the government is expected to do, and not allow things to discover, and because nobody has the time and energy to go into battle with government. Nobody wants to do an arbitration with government, because then you know who's the winner, who's the loser upfront. Okay. Finally, in terms of, I mean, I spoke about risk. There also has to be reward. For example, if you look at how currently STPs are being contracted out on HAM, I mean, there is one fundamental thing which we have been telling about the structure, is that there is no incentive for long-term performance today. For example, if I bid a certain tariff, a tariff as in I bid a certain power consumption norm. And based on that power consumption norm, I'm awarded a project. I have no incentive to improve the power consumption norm that I have bid on. Tomorrow, let us say there is a more efficient way of operating the STP, which includes a capital investment. We are willing to make that capital investment provided the gains are with us. But today, all the power consumption gains goes to the government. There is no gain to the private sector. So a plant which is poorly designed now will ultimately end up running as a poorly inefficient plant for the next 15 years because there is no incentive for the private sector. So that incentivization is also important. I'm just giving one example. Why can't there be incentivization similarly for improving the delivery period? Okay. What is the kind of incentive that is there for improving the delivery period? These are things which also must be, see, if you, first of all, everybody is talking about risk sharing, that is important. But if you don't create the right incentive, whether it is for technology or whether it is for innovation in a long-term contract, then I can guarantee that nobody is going to do it. That will end up, in one sense, spoiling the market because the only players that are going to come in today are the same set of contractors, EPC and O&M contractors. And their incentive in any contract is always to see how quickly they can take the money upfront. Manatara was again mentioning about front loading. Why is front loading happening? Because the community of people who are bidding today are fundamentally EPC contractors. And they don't have an incentive clearly to stay in the game for long term. So while we must address the risk, we also have to bring in the necessary rewards and some kind of regulatory mechanism to ensure these kind of practices like front loading from happening. Because otherwise, today the HAM project, unfortunately, is being seen as a mechanism to fund the EPC contractors and not a mechanism to facilitate private capital to flow in. So in a nutshell, I think if you were to look at three things, one is make sure that there is visibility of money. So just to elaborate on visibility of money, then maybe the private sector should be allowed to focus on recycle projects, where you have sewage recycle to industry and you create a structure for sewage recycle to industry as a mechanism. Similarly, you should kind of focus more on where the government has a capacity to pay either directly or through the industry for large desalination projects, where you create a charging mechanism for the industry, which will in some sense in the short term cross-subsidize the lack of ability to charge the domestic consumers, and then create a structure for the private sector to come in. Second, of course, like I said, obviously make it transparent, the risk, and finally create enough rewards so that the private sector can continue to stay interested in the project for 15 or 20 or 25 years.
Thank you. Thank you. I think very comprehensive response. Mr. Garg, we wanted to specifically because, again, you've been a veteran in this sector. Wanted to understand, what are your thoughts as to what are the latest technological developments and how do you see digital, and with artificial intelligence, analytics, blockchain, how do you see the landscape of water and wastewater projects changing with the induction of new technology, both conventional technology as well as digital technology coming in the future?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first I would like to cover the various aspects of the treatment plant and the working of the water supply and sewage systems, which has improved in the last 15 years because of the induction of the new technology. Like in the water treatment plant, now you have dual media filters, you have declining rate of filters, like depending upon how much flow rate you want to treat, or depending upon what is ahead, and you want the continuity of the filtration plant to go on. uninterrupted, because in a conventional treatment plant or filter, you have to stop it for backwashing. So in case of disc filter, which is generally used for wastewater treatment plant, you don't have to really stop it. And they work continually for 24 hours, maybe at varying flow rates. That is one. And then you have for treatment of the, say, Nala, like you have this Najafgarh drain in Delhi. Now there is a proposal to treat it using floating wetland treatment technique. That is, you have got a phytoremediation technique. Like you have plants which are immersed and they float like a island in the Nala, and they go on treating. That is, their roots which are submerged in the Nala, they absorb the contaminants and the degradation of the organic matter takes place on their roots. So this is also a new technique which is being used, and I think in the coming months you will see it being used for treatment of this Sahibi River. It used to be called Sahibi River long back, flowing from Haryana to Yamuna, going through Delhi, about 53 kilometers long. That is one. And sequential batch reactor is the same thing now for wastewater treatment plants. I think all over the country it is being used for bigger plants, and DVATs in smaller pockets, like you have where you have huge changes in the ground gradient and you want smaller pockets to be treated at one place. So DVATs techniques are also being used, though it's a very old technique, but this is being used. Then like as you say about for using other forms of technology like IoT and artificial intelligence, I would say that artificial intelligence is more based on optics. So this can be used to find out what is the contaminant in any, like in water, in a water body, and what is the degree of contamination. So that can also be used to increase the effectiveness of the treatment technology. And IoT can also be used for that, for even monitoring your groundwater table depths. And this data, like in a particular state, can also be transmitted all over the district, all over the state using IoT technology. And we do have PLC SCADA system for monitoring our wastewater treatment plants, our water treatment plants, to know the effectiveness of the various treatment units. And I think we have come a long way, and we are using it extensively in all our water supply and wastewater treatment plants and systems. I think there is a big improvement.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. I think, that's very helpful. I will move to Mr. Dasgupta. So, Mr. Dasgupta, I think you spoke a lot about your experiences and the challenges that you're facing in the irrigation sector. So, how do you kind of get more players, more private players to get interested in this space? And how do you see the landscape evolving in terms of contractual structures going ahead in the future? And what would be your suggestions on any policy initiatives that the government could take specifically to encourage more private sector participation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting question at the right opportune moment, because last week only, or probably a couple of weeks back, a few tenders got awarded in the NVDA, which is Narmada Valley Development Authority. They're doing it from Madhya Pradesh, and a couple of new players, including Adani. Say, for example, Adani came into the water space first through Namami Gange. In the sense, I mean, as Nayantara was already mentioning, so they first, they first attempted a bid in Haridwar, then Mathura, then Varanasi and all that, and then first came into the water space by taking into the job of Prayagraj. And then they repeated with Bhagalpur. But they were mainly into the wastewater space as well as a desal space, but that's kind of more of internal what they're doing. But recently, there is this project in Sakaria, which is in Madhya Pradesh, and this is for Narmada Valley NVDA project. They came into this space. Now, for a company like Adani to come into water space is not new, but what attracts them? What attracts them is the value of the project. So this particular project was almost close to 4,000 crores, right? So companies like L&T, companies like Adani, even companies like Jindal, I mean, where I'm working, we look at the value of the project. What kind of value we're looking at? We're looking at a 1,500 crores project, 2,000 crores, 4,000 crores, these kind of projects. So value of the project attract these kind of companies and keep the small players out. Now, when I say small players out, I'm not talking it in a very derogatory sense. What I'm saying is what the government is doing. 5 projects came out in NVDA. It ranged from 400 to 4,000 to 100. Now see the spectrum. You have a 4,000 crore project which is going under the hammer. You also have a 100 crore project which is going under the hammer. So what they have done or what they are doing since 2017 or I would say 2018, they're trying to split projects in such a way that they have all sorts of participation. For an L&T or for an Adani or for a I don't know, for a Reliance, if it comes someday, for a Jindal or for similar kind of players, you need the number. So that kind of number, the government is providing you. Say this project I was talking about, this dead runs or these kind of massive projects. Here you have the bigger private players who are coming into picture, and they are taking up these projects and going for execution. Whereas the end schemes, say for example, in irrigation, you typically talk about 10 hectare tracts, 5 hectare tracts, 2.5 hectare tracts. Where what kind of water or what is the area this particular water is going to serve. So let's say it can have 10 hectares, you can have 5 hectares, 2.5, 1 hectare. So further down the line, whatever is remaining, so let's say in a 2.5 hectare, then the next distribution system or the creation of channels around that 2.5 hectare land, the government is bringing out projects for those also. So for those, you have the small players, the local players who are working, and it makes more sense because for a local player going for 100 or 200 crores project is more beneficial because they know the ins and out of the system. And you do not have to put a new setup for those kind of projects. Whereas the initial base where you construct the dam, where you construct the intake, where you construct these huge pipelines, you have the bigger private players. So the government, very wisely, I would say, is splitting up the projects in such a manner that there is food for everyone. You have the big players, you have the medium players, you have the small players. You have this 4,000 crore project, you have this 1,000 crores project, you have this 100 crores project, all in the same package, right? 5 tenders coming out ranging from 4,000, 1,000, 2,000, 1,000 and 100. So that is one way of looking at it. Because see, in case of wastewater, as Mr. Garg was pointing out, in case of wastewater, you have a lot of technologies. The technology players can come and make a difference. Say, recently, you had 7 tenders which got awarded in Mumbai. 7 tenders ranging from 500 MLD to 180 MLD. So there you could see the technology players coming into picture. You had the Suez of the world, you had this Toshiba, you had this L&T was there, you had Xylem there. So all that range came into picture because there the technology was given given the impetus. Whereas in case of irrigation there is per se, I mean, I'm not going to be going into the technology of drip irrigation or everything, but per se there is not such of a technology. So for these, if you have to attract private players, the numbers would need to matter, right? So that's how the government is structuring the things. The second is when you're talking about what kind of policy initiatives. Now, policy initiatives, the problem is, now to invite more players, you have to dilute down the pre-qualification. So if you talk about, I mean, I will keep on switching between urban, rural, as well as irrigation. If you talk about, for example, when the Namami Gange projects were initially conceived by IFC, by Tri-Legal, by companies like that, the Namami Gange pre-qualifications used to be in such a way you had the cream coming, and you had those kind of project deliveries happening. Over the period of time, now Namami Gange, and you used to have about 4 to 5 players playing in the field. Now, to invite more competition, the dilution of pre-qualification has happened to such an extent that now for a 220 MLD kind of a scenario, 220 MLD wastewater treatment plant kind of a scenario, you have 20 players bidding. Whereas we are talking about a 50 MLD in a Varanasi or a similar size where you had 5 or 6 players. Now, whether it is good or bad, only time will tell. But if you are allowing, I would go up to that extent that if you are allowing everyone to come in every field, what happens is, the delivery of the projects becomes an issue. Now, today we won't understand it. Today we are thinking that, okay, you see, we are getting so competitive bids, we are saving so much money of the exchequer and etc., etc. But 2 years down the line, 4 years down the line, or whenever the project completion, if the project doesn't get delivered, which there is a high chance, then that exchequer's money which you had anyway saved, it's gone. And then you put double that amount to ensure that now the project is running. So it becomes a double whammy, and this is bound to happen. So probably the policy initiatives which needs to be taken is one, as you mentioned at the beginning, the performance needs to be monitored at every stage. You cannot just say that, let's say it's a PPP project, I am bringing in 40, the contractor brings in 60%. So, the KPI, whenever the KPI will happen, and we will penalize them, or we will do whatever we want. But if a plant is faultily built, 4 years down the line, what are you going to do? You have nothing to do. You can penalize him as much, but the water is not going to get treated. The water is not going to reach its customer. So a milestone-based monitoring, a milestone-based performance-based contract is the essence of the hour, where you're continuously monitoring the system. And secondly, each project should have a benchmark. Like a 1,000 crore project, a person who has never done a project in his life of more than 100 crores, he simply cannot do a 1,000 crore project. So you have to have that impetus. It used to be 80% of the project value. Then it came down to 60% of the project value. Now they have brought it down to 25% of the project value. So a 250 crore guy is supposed to do a 1,000 crore project. I mean, good to hear, but whether it will happen or not, only time will tell. And then time is the essence. Like this, for example, this NVDA projects. Time is the essence, because you have a certain period when the Narmada water is available for you, right? So once that period passes, the Narmada water is not going to come to you. It will go back to Gujarat. Not go back to Gujarat. It will stay in Gujarat. So what are you going to do? You're going to, you do these agitations. Then you go for a dharna. You go to Supreme Court. Supreme Court will say, okay, water is the essence. Please release, and the whole story again starts. So
Wonderful.
I think prevention is better than cure. So we should go in that direction.
Sure. No, I think excellent. I think we are now at the fag end of, I see that we just have a couple of minutes in this webinar. So I would like to thank all the panelists and Vicky for organizing this webinar. I think we've covered a very wide range of subjects across sectors. I think we tried to cover the entire water sector space and also a wide range of issues. So with this, I would hand us over to Sachin for concluding remarks on this. Sachin,
sure, Mr. Sinha. Thank you, Mr. Sinha, for moderating the session so well. Thank you, speakers, for sharing your views. This has been an enriching experience. The ideas and deliberation arising out of this conference would go a long way in addressing the challenges and reflecting a way forward. With these words, once again, I thank you all, speakers and delegates, and our legal partner, Tri-Legal. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.